Hi, Trevor here, reflecting on life through music. Welcome and thank you for stopping by. Well, I trust you've been enjoying this mini-series on the Beatles. Two videos ago, I looked at their Beatlemania period when they were performing a lot. In the last video, I looked at their non-performing period when they were becoming innovative in the studio with some of these incredible albums like Sgt. Pepper's and albums like that. And today I thought, to finish off this series, I thought I would look at the legacy of the Beatles. Now, much has been said about the Beatles over the time, and I suppose I could go into so much detail here, but I'm just going to share a little bit of an observation of what made these guys so influential. Was it just all talk and they're a bit overrated? Well, no, they're not overrated at all. They deserve the accolades and they deserve the notoriety that they have received. And so over the next little while, I'm going to talk about what made these guys so influential. As for me, I was born in 1965, so I suppose for me, the Beatles were just a little bit before my time. But I certainly get the influence of them on music in general. So I suppose the best way to look at influence is to look at what makes music, what is needed in music for it to be successful and popular. And I suppose the starting point is album sales. So it is estimated they have sold 600 million albums. So therefore they are the highest band artist, selling artist of all time. There probably will never be anyone that gets anywhere close to 600 million albums. If you think about 600 million, that's 600,000 albums. Now, if I released an album, got 1,000 copies sold or 100 copies sold, I'd be really happy. But these guys have sold 600 million albums. Highest sellers in the US. These guys from the UK, highest sellers in the US. So that's a feat of its own. It's estimated that their catalogue is worth $1 billion. You think about the fact, the amount of times Beatles songs would be played every single day. That's the sort of revenue that the catalogue has actually brought the Beatles. So album sales is one thing. The next thing we probably need to talk about with the Beatles is their songs. Now, Lennon and McCartney were master songwriters, and interestingly also they were a partnership. And if we think about partnerships since then, we think about Bernie Taupin and Elton John. We think about Benny and Bjorn from ABBA. And many other bands where there has been partnerships. There's something quite compelling about a songwriting partnership. You keep each other accountable. You keep each other inspired to be out to continue to write songs. Because if you're writing with someone else, well, you kind of just got to keep it going. And so, yeah, Lennon and McCartney's songwriting is hailed as some of the best ever. You think about how beautiful their melodies are. You think about the fact that how rocky sometimes the melodies are. You think about the words. When you write a song, you just don't say, well, she broke up with me. What you talk about is you talk about, well, I really enjoyed those yesterday days. They were fantastic, but yesterday is gone. It's never going to come back. How I long for yesterday. Or we think about, I am the walrus, whatever that's about. You know, you don't just make the words obvious, you make them a bit mysterious, magical mystery to it. That could be about anything at all. Nowhere Man is that song, is he singing about himself there? Yellow Submarine. Whatever the inspiration is behind that song, I have no idea. But we all live on a yellow submarine. I mean, why not? Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields are iconic places that they would know growing up. So we make our words a little bit mysterious and a little bit not obvious, and so it gives us a chance for our brains to think about, well, what could this song mean for me? So instead of just listening to the song, you engage with the song in your innermost being to work out what the song means for you. Now, Lennon and McCartney were masters at writing words such as this, and when you put it together with their melodies, um, they are some beautiful songs indeed. And if you think about the fact that over the 10-year period they had 13, well, officially 13 albums, I'm sure there were more here and there, but that's at least 130 songs if you think about an album. And often you don't get all of the songs you write on the album, you often pick, and so the output of Lennon and McCartney is quite substantial. 13 albums in 10 years, if you think about in some years, in 2 or 3 of the years, there were 2 albums in a year. It just goes to show the prolific output of the Beatles and how efficient they were in the studio. So there were certainly the songs. Now we need to actually, I suppose, talk about how they were on stage as well, because there are many elements that made these guys the all-round performers. First of all, we had bass guitar with Paul. Now, bass guitar was starting to become popular, but the Beatles really brought the bass guitar to the fore, and understanding that the bass guitar really is the drive of the band. It's the thing that drives the sound along with the drums. And so bass guitar was a thing. We then had Ringo on drums. Now Ringo was an exceptional drummer, and he wasn't scared to try things and try rhythm and try different things to try and complement the sound. And often he was at the back on his own. The 3 in the front, and he was on his own at the back, but Ringo was not scared to try different things as a drummer. And then, of course, then we had 2 guitars. We had a rhythm guitar, which John would play. Then we had a lead guitar, which George would play. And certainly the combination of those 2 guitars meant that the lead could do things because he knew the rhythm was being carried by another guitar. I think the combination of rhythm and lead has certainly been something that bands have used going forward. Then we also need to talk about their vocals. Part of the fact they could all sing really, really well, their harmonies were exceptional. You think about the normal sort of lineup, John would be over one side on his own microphone, and Paul and George would be on the other mic, sharing that mic because they needed to be able to hear each other sing. So they could sing in harmony, and not just single harmonies. There was 3-part harmony going on with them, and they could do it really, really well. If you think about songs like Nowhere Man, when they were doing that live, 3-part on stage. And I suppose a bit of a departure for the 1950s, where we had really, really good harmonies, but often the singers would sing without their instruments, and would be a band behind them. Well, the Beatles played and sang in harmony at the same time, making them an exceptional live tight act. So their vocals were phenomenal, their music, and they could all play really, really well, and they weren't scared to really explore their instruments. And this concept of 4 too, I think, there's certainly something that has been copied over many years by other bands. You think about bands like Oasis, there were 4 of them. We think of bands like The Church in Australia, 4 of them. We think about bands like the Bangles, 4 of them. We think about bands like Coldplay, 4 of them. There is something about the number 4 that the Beatles certainly brought in. And now, say for instance, you were a 5-piece, well, often the 5th person would be the lead vocalist who doesn't play. But behind the lead vocalist, there are 4 guys playing instruments. One of the guitars might be a keyboard. But still, the concept of the lead guitar being free to be able to do what it needs to do is something that the Beatles established and brought in. So there's something about the number 4 in music as well. Something else that was significant for the Beatles, particularly when in the second half of their career, when they were more in the studio, They demanded that the production and recording be pushed to the absolute extreme. They would use all sorts of sounds to try and complement what they were doing. So an audience person listening would say, "Gee, what's that sound? That sounds interesting and weird and wonderful." And so they push their production techniques to the absolute limit. This concept of layering sounds one after the other. So you start off with the drums and you just basically build it up. But you've got this ability to multi-track, something that the Beatles had a lot to do with. And the reason why some of their songs have got so much in them is because of this multi-tracking. I mean, if you think of songs like Penny Lane and All You Need Is Love, when you've got the brass and everything going on, that's what you can do when you multi-track. And the Beatles certainly were quite influential in this concept of production, how the songs can sound. Let's explore the absolute lengths and breadths of studio, see if we can get some absolutely amazing production happening in these songs. So very influential in the recording and production techniques of their songs. So there's just a few things. I think you think about them on stage, you think about their songs, you think about their output. And the other thing we need to talk about, I suppose, the Beatlemania period. You know, we saw for the first time screaming fans. In fact, so loud that they had to give up on it after a while. But this concept of kids running to see their idols. I mean, you think of bands like the Bay City Rollers and ABBA, who too had manias. You know, this concept of screaming fans and being really, really engaging with the band was something that the Beatles brought in. We had never seen that ever. So very significant. So very much all-round band, performing, songwriting, output, the whole thing. Very influential indeed. And it wasn't just... And they also received many accolades and awards over their time too. In 1965, they all received the Member of the British Empire, MBE, all of them 1965. They'd only been going for 5 years and they received an MBE. So they were being acknowledged by the Queen Elizabeth II at that point of how influential these guys actually were. In 1971, they received an Academy Award for the song Let It Be. So that's very much the movie world. And we talk about, movies, think about Yellow Submarine, about the fact that they combine music with movie to create an all-round musical experience. They won 7 Grammy Awards. And actually in 2014, they received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Now the Grammys are in the United States. It just goes to show how significant these guys actually were. In 1988, the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, Mick Jagger was the guy that inducted them, and of course, the Rolling Stones were doing their thing as the Beatles were doing their thing, and I think there was a bit of a healthy sort of rivalry going on between those two bands because they both became quite successful and quite popular. And so Mick Jagger inducted them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And between 1994 and 2015, the 4 guys, John, George, Paul and Ringo, were all inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in their own individual right. It's probably something that hasn't really been done, where you see the band and then the 4 individual guys all getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that was a pretty huge thing as well. And then of course we also need to talk about the legacy of the 4 of them after the Beatles were over, because they were all quite prolific, had prolific output in their own right. John, between 1968, note that date, 1968, which is before the Beatles actually finished. So they were already starting to think about what would happen next. So John released 11 albums through 1968 to 1984. Think of songs like Woman and So This Is Christmas, songs of his. George released 12 albums from 1968 to 2002. When My Guitar Gently Weeps and Sweet Lord was some songs of his. And of course, George was also part of the Travelling Wilburys. In fact, one of the founding members of the Travelling Wilburys. And so 12 albums from George. Paul, between 1970 and 2018, has released 25 albums. Now, of course, he was with a band called Wings with his wife Linda. Songs like Live and Let Die and Silly Love Songs and Undercover in his own right. So he's released 25 albums since the Beatles finished up. And Ringo, between 1970 and 2019, has released 20 albums. Now, I get by with a little help from my friends. Obviously, that was a Beatles song, but many songs there as well. So, and so in their own rights, they have been significant as well, and the legacy certainly was continuing. And I think that was one of the reasons probably they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in their own right, was because of that prolific output after the Beatles were over. So there certainly has been a lot of music over a very, very long time. If you think about, 1960 to 2020, 2019, that's like 60 years. It's an incredible amount of time for guys to be creating music, which these four have incredibly well. Now, of course, the world was rocked in 1980 when John Lennon was shot. And such a senseless thing to see stuff like that go on. And so John Lennon did die in 1980, and George Harrison died in 2001. But Ringo and Paul are still around. And I suppose, the world paused a little bit in 1980 and 2001 when those two died, because these guys are rock and roll royalty. That's what makes these guys so compelling, from pop songs to rock songs to progressive rock. And if we think about these guys, we talk about their influence on other music. We think about bands like the Electric Light Orchestra and the Moody Blues and Asia, and Yes, where this whole concept of an Alan Parsons project. We think about the use of orchestra in their songs, making the songs making it really, really rich and really, really full sound. The influence of the Beatles on music after them has been absolutely prolific, and I'm sure many artists, particularly those that have been around for a while, will cite the Beatles as a major influence. And so that's another nice thing to be able to say about the Beatles, was their influence on music in general. Well, that's why I think, anyway, the Beatles are significant and influential. And yes, I think all the words that have been said about them are actually true and are warranted. And it's good to be able to reflect on such a significant band as the Beatles. Well, I trust that's an encouragement for you today, as we think about our influences and what makes us who we are. Well, I suppose in the world of music, there's probably nothing bigger than the Beatles. So on to the clips today. And in 1995, a cassette was found of John singing a couple of songs just to a piano. And this tape was discovered, and the Beatles thought, what do you reckon? Do you reckon we could go? So 1970, they broke up. Things probably weren't terribly friendly between them at that point. But 25 years later, they got back, and they were going to get Jeff Lynne to do the production and the engineering on this, because Jeff carried on the Beatles' legacy through the Electric Light Orchestra, so he kind of got their sound. So in 1995, they released Free as a Bird and Real Love, and these were songs started off with a cassette singing to a piano, and then gradually, just through the layering and building up that Jeff Lynne is famous for, they released a couple of new songs. And I've got both the clips for both of those songs. And both of those clips are just full of nostalgia and memories. I mean, there's just so many pictures that the Beatles have So many images that you can conjure up for the Beatles, so many memories, so many song locations. Look at the Calvin Club where it all started. Free as a Bird and Real Love are just full of memories of the Beatles, and it's quite a beautiful, nostalgic look back at these four incredible guys as they formed the Beatles. So I've got both official clips, Free as a Bird and Real Love, there from 1995. So, really have a look at those, because if the Beatles ever decided to do anything new, it was going to be a major world announcement, and these two songs came out and the world was absolutely happy that these songs came out. So there's that, and we talk about influence, and I've gone to the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award evening in 2014. Now, interestingly, that was 50 years after the famous Ed Sullivan Show performance in America. And here you see Jeff Lynne and Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh is part of the Beatles extended family. Of course, Joe is in the Eagles and has done stuff in his own right. Jeff Lynne I've already spoken about, and he just gets the Beatles. He just gets them. And it's nice to also see Dhani Harrison on stage here, George's son. And Dhani has really been taken under Jeff Lynne's wing to a fair bit, and has given him a lot of opportunity to perform. And so you see Dhani Harrison on stage here as well, as they sing the classic Beatles song Something. Just so beautifully done, so respectful, and just really adhering to the original version of Something, which is probably a stunningly beautiful song by the Beatles. And here you see the crowd just being the audience of Hollywood royalty, just being swept away by the beauty of the song Something. So enjoy that clip as well. I suppose that's a little more along the lines of the legacy and influence of the Beatles on others, and you see the others paying tribute to the Beatles for that legacy. And while we're on the Free as a Bird, which I talked about earlier, I've also included a little bit of a documentary on the recording of that particular song, and just sort of the stuff that went on, and the feelings and the thoughts, and they're all being interviewed. Obviously John's not there, but the other three are, and you just get to see the interesting time, interesting being the operative word, time that was, as they just got back together and just made music again. It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so I also encourage you to look at that interview as that little doco. It's quite cool. It's about 20 minutes long, so feel free to have a look at that one. And I've also included my commentary from last time from the song Let It Be. So if you want to recap on that one, feel free to look at that as well. So that's it for me, for the Beatles. I haven't done them anywhere near the justice that they deserve, but I suppose I've put my own spin on it without getting into too much detail, because the Beatles are a force of nature, and they are so influential in the world of music, hence the 3 videos on them. And to Paul and to Ringo, and I suppose to the families of John Lennon and George Harrison, thank you for your gift to the world. Thank you for your beautiful songs. Thank you for your awesome playing, and thank you for your willingness to be brave and creative and innovative. The world will be forever thankful for the legacy of the Beatles. So to Paul and Ringo, if you guys are watching, thank you for what you've brought to this world. Congratulations. Well done indeed. Well, that's it for today. If you do like this video, please give it the thumbs up, and I'd love you to subscribe. If you actually are back for another video, thank you very much for hanging around. I appreciate you very, very much indeed. It's nice to actually see the engagement we're getting, which is fantastic. Well, next time we're going to go on to the Bee Gees, and with their incredible harmonies and also their incredible career. So that's next time. So until then, I'll catch you around.